we're here to talk about financial inclusion, which in a conference that's all about the buzzy future of fintech might sound like it's just the kind of the do-gooding session where we show that we care. But it is not about that. Financial inclusion is actually one of the most interesting areas in which technology is being applied to the financial sphere. And we have a terrific panel of people here to talk to us about some of those different approaches. So before we start that, get out your phones, open the Bloomberg styt.com app, because we're going to do a vote. And the question that you are going to be voting on is, drum roll, and I'm deliberately seeding this question without a lot of context, because we're going to come back to discuss it later. So the question is, are cryptocurrencies a likely solution for people who are underserved by traditional finance? Yes or no? Okay, so consensus seems to be tilting at about 1/3 yes, 2/3 no. Fair enough. Better than I expected, actually. All right, so let us begin. So Shamina, I've asked Shamina to give us a little bit, start by giving us a little bit of context for the topic of financial inclusion, what the issues are, what are the problems that we're trying to solve.
Sure, thanks for having me. Really great to be here with all of you. And since this is a sooner than you think panel, I'm going to give you two things that are coming sooner than you think and one thing that I think is going to help address it. So the two things that are coming or that are here sooner than you think: information inequality. Cash is not a friend of the poor. And the thing that's helping to solve both of those, financial inclusion, through technology and through the work that many of us are doing on this panel. So the fact that you're here listening to this, I think, is financial inclusion is the thing that is here and now and sooner than you think. Why is it important? Well, if you think about it, you all showed up here today. This is New York City, right? So many of you, and this is a tech conference, so you showed up, you used your phone to pay for everything you had to pay for, you used your bank account, you have your driver's license, you have everything you need in order to move in a society. Well, think about 2 billion people around the world who are trapped in an economy where they can only transact with the people that they know and that they can see, and in a very small geography. These are people who are living in a cash-only economy. They're excluded from the financial systems that allow, among other things, economic mobility. So when I say financial inclusion is the thing that says it is trying to address the fact that 85% of the world's retail transactions are still done in cash. Cash is not a friend of the poor person, and it's certainly not a friend of a woman who has very little access to financial independence unless she has her own identity and her own ability to use her identity to access all of this great technology that we're producing in this world. So when I say information inequality is coming sooner than you think, the information haves and the information have-nots are suffering from the greatest divide we've ever seen, and it's only getting bigger and wider. So this conversation today, I think, around financial inclusion is extremely important, and one I hope that will generate the kind of insights that we can take away today.
Right, so tell us a bit about the work that you're doing at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth.
Sure, just very quickly. So the Center for Inclusive Growth was actually created by the company to leverage the assets of the Firm for Social Impact. And if you think about a firm like Mastercard, which basically connects buyers and sellers who can't see each other on a technology network, the amount of transaction and the amount of information that crosses along those rails every second of every day is pretty massive and pretty important. And so when we are given the opportunity to say, look, there are massive assets of this company, technology, money to be sure, insights, and of course our people, how do you turn those to social impact? And the first answer and the last answer and the only answer is, how do we bring people in to the formal economy, and how do we put them on the path out of poverty into one of shared prosperity. And that actually is our definition of inclusive growth. It's creating a society where you start with financial inclusion, but what you're really trying to do is create a sustainable and equitable economic growth for everyone.
Okay, so let's move to Tidhar and talk about cash, because as you said, cash is not the friend of the poor. Tidhar runs a Better Than Cash Alliance. Tell us what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Better Than Cash Alliance is a UN-based partnership of governments, companies, international organizations that are all focused on moving from cash to digital payments for the same reasons that Shamina mentioned: financial inclusion, driving transparency, making sure that people are getting better service, etc. And we've been working with most of our members, the governments that range from India to Mexico to Colombia to Peru, to support the transition from cash to digital payments, and also putting it on the agenda of global fora like the G20. I think what's really been interesting in the last couple of years is seeing that our market leaders, the companies whose core business is not financial services, like Gap, like H&M, like Unilever, like Marks & Spencer, are now realizing as well that beyond what governments are doing, they also have a role to play. And I know that there are some of those actors here in this room today, and it's exciting to see that people who's not traditionally interested or not traditionally interested in financial inclusion are now realizing that there's a role for them to play by digitizing, for instance, wages to garment workers in Bangladesh, by working with suppliers to make sure that they can transact digitally, by working with smallholder farmers to get them the technologies and the payment capacities that they did not have before, and that's a game changer for all of them.
Can you talk a little bit about what impacts this is having? Can you quantify any of it?
Well, we can see that the World Bank runs this survey every few years, a Findex, and in the last one, the one that came out in 2017, we have seen that between 2013 and 2017, 500 million, half a billion people got access to financial services. And most of them, that was thanks to digital payments. And so if you see that in 3 years, we can get half a billion people to the formal financial system, that's mind-blowing for me.
Right. Okay, Wole, let's move to you quickly, because you came from the traditional financial sector. You started MoCaFi a couple of years ago. And people often, I think about financial inclusion as an issue for poor countries, but obviously it's an issue in rich countries too. So tell us about what led you to start MoCaFi and what you're doing.
That's great. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about technology as solving first world problems, and you've heard today about companies that are thinking about just that, and one that comes to mind is a SoFi, right? Using technology for that end of the market, and then you think about financial technology solving what I'll call third world problems. And then you have the whole group of people who've got second world problems, right? And in the United States, a third of Americans are either unbanked or underbanked. And if you take another look at those numbers, in the African American community, that's 55%. In the Hispanic community, it's 50%. And in the working white class community across this country, I think the numbers are very similar. So there is an opportunity to sort of think about using technology, because everyone's got a mobile phone, and what you find is sometimes individuals who fall in the categories we're talking about are actually more sophisticated with their mobile device than people who might be what I'll call first world people, because they depend upon that one device as their entry point into the world. And so the thought process was, let's try to move the needle on the $170, $180 billion payday loan, check cash, or pawn shop industry using technology that solves those second world problems. And if you do that, you can create a much stronger economy. And so we've really been focused on the United States. And my background, I was very fortunate to work at Citigroup and Willis and at JP Morgan, and really understood how financial services can transform communities, and thought it was important to take a very aggressive social agenda that we have in this country and bring an aggressive economic plan for the population that tends to be overlooked from an innovation perspective, and wanted to use my talents to try to address those issues.
And talk a little bit about what that experience looks like for the people who are using your services.
So for the people using our services, we wanted to start with the data. And we think it's very important that if you can understand who a person is, how they transact, then you'd be in a much better position to figure out what are the appropriate products and services that they may be eligible for or might be appropriate for them. So our products is we basically have taken the prepaid platform, which is a great platform because it allows everyone to participate. You just have to enroll, you don't have to apply. And as a result of that, everyone by definition can be a part of it, and our platform allows you to build your credit. And so for underserved Americans, or even the 100 million who are thin to no credit file in this country, the biggest expense they have is rent. And for our platform, we've really been focused on how do we make the rent experience one that allows people to build their credit, because as your credit score goes up, your cost to borrow and other things go down. And just an interesting statistic, right here in New York, the comptroller did an analysis last year and said, geez, if people who lived in New York City public housing had their payments reported to the credit bureaus, 20 to 30% of those people would have 700 or credit score or better. And so can you imagine the transformational experience that can have on someone who's living in a place like New York City public housing, and if they want to have a path to upward mobility? And so we really are leaning in on that and other aspects to help communities move themselves forward.
Thank you. All right, so I'll ask you, and starting again with Shamina, to talk a little bit about what are some of the projects for financial inclusion that you've seen around the world that seem the most interesting to you, or the most powerful?
Right. Well, this one is just fantastic. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, just to put a finer point on it. Think about it from the perspective of the entrepreneur. So what do you need if you're an entrepreneur, you're starting a business? Most of the time, you need capital. You need a loan, besides writing your business plan or whatever. But for most people around the world, the way that you have to get a loan is through a bank. What is the first thing a bank asks you? What's your credit score, or what's your collateral? Those are kind of two universal questions that happen all over the world. For most people around the world, they cannot answer those two questions. So what kind of world are we living in with all of this technology that we cannot create some sort of proxy for your ability to access capital, or frankly, your ability to define purchasing power? And that's the type of technology, and those are the types of programs that I'm most excited about. They're the ones who are transforming people's ability to buy and sell and borrow and lend and become more economically mobile, because they're questioning the underlying value of how we transact in this world. So for example, you talked about 1 in 3 Americans in terms of where they're living in the poverty spectrum. 1 in 3 Americans are also gig workers. Mm-hmm. How many people here are in this room are doing 1 or more gigs, side hustle, whatever? Like, there are people, the idea of a 40-hour per week, 5-day-a-week job is gone. So the future of work is about gig work. And how do you manage several jobs or several instances where you have to create a life for yourself and your family? And it's not the gig that's necessarily the one that says, oh, I'm going to do, maybe a craft job, or I'm going to do this job. These are people who are trying to make their lives for their families, right? And so I think that the most interesting programs that I'm seeing are ones that allow gig work to become more effective. So what are those things that are helping gig workers solve for time and money, which are their 2 largest commodities? We have a program going right now with Care.com. I hope people have used Care.com. I use it all the time. But we worked with Care.com to help them understand how to better help the people working on the Care.com platform realize the benefits of the money they were earning on the platform. That's the type of stuff where I see technology working for everybody that I think is really exciting.
Thank you. What about you, Tidhar? What's got you fired up?
I think for me, the most exciting moment is where you see people using digital payments for the next stage, meaning, meeting people in Kenya who are getting access to clean energy for the first time in their life, using pay-as-you-go scheme based on mobile payments. Or talking to women in Nepal who are getting loans for the first time to pay for education for their children. Or meeting people in Tanzania who are now, thanks to digital payments, are not waiting 3 hours to get water, but are waiting 10 minutes to get water. And so when you travel around the world and you speak to those people for whom having the access to digital payments is changing radically the way they live, this is where it gets very, very exciting.
Yeah. So actually, what you've all been saying brings me to a question that has to do with what you raised, Shamina, about data inequality. So as Wole said, even here, the traditional credit scoring system is pretty broken. And that is based on some fairly well-defined indicators that are what's allowed to contribute to your credit score. In some of the places that are trying alternative credit scores, people are coming up with ideas of credit scores that are based on your purchasing history, on your social media activity, things like that, collecting a lot of data around people. And isn't there a risk that with some of these financial technology projects that a lot of data has been collected about people that they don't really understand how it's being used, and that algorithms are being used to take decisions that are not necessarily transparent in who they're granting what to? How do you overcome that problem of data inequality?
Well, I think that the example that I think about is a project we have actually going with Unilever in Kenya, where Kenya shop owners, they have a value chain of about 40,000 shop owners just in one supply chain, which is pretty significant when you think about the number of shops who are selling one bar of soap, one piece of gum. These are not shops that are selling 12 packs of soft drinks and things like that. So these are shop owners who are living at the very tip of the spear in terms of how they're surviving every day. One of the things that they do every day, every week, is they buy their products from suppliers, right? So they buy their products from Unilever in order to stock their shelves. So one of the things we worked on with Unilever was to say, look, you have information on the amount that's being purchased every week from many of these shop owners in your system anyways, because they're coming back and forth. And so Unilever has a platform where you buy and sell. So we said, look, why don't we work with those insights that are on that platform, and then bring in one of our partners called Kenya Commercial Bank to say, will you look at that information as a proxy for credit, as a way to say, Unilever, these people have been buying from you for a very long time. You basically have a history of how they transact. So can we work with you and a bank to bring the cost of credit down such that a bank can lend to them and give them formal loans? So realize that what you're talking about going to payday lenders, these are people going to payday lenders where they're paying 20, 30, 40% rates of interest on their loans. So when people are showing up to these payday lenders, they're giving them half their paycheck to get half of their family fed most of the time. That's right. So I sort of think about this idea around information inequality and this ability to use information that shop owners, for example, are already using, but applying a different lens to it and saying, with the technology that we have today, can we bring down the cost of transacting? And to me, that's the kind of transformation that I think is really interesting.
And just to pick up on that point, it's also the access. So in this country, 80% of the bank branches that have closed have been in low to moderate income communities. And so, you've created an environment where there are banking deserts, and people don't have access to the traditional banking services that you and I take for granted. And as a result, just because there isn't a bank branch there doesn't mean that someone's banking needs go away. Mm-hmm. And as a result, that's why we've seen such a proliferation of these alternative financial services companies. But at the same time, now that everyone has a smartphone and is very comfortable using that device, so this is a moment where I think this conversation about underserved Americans in particular is one where we've sort of been running in place for a period of time in terms of how to address these issues. We're at a technological moment where because we've cut the cord, if you will, you can transform people's lives. Now, the way we think about it, though, and the reality is, just because you have the technology, you also have to couple that with changing behaviors. Yeah. And behavioral change allows us to explore some of the behavioral science that we are talking a lot about, particularly for this population, because you've got issues of trust, you have issues of just generational fossilization. That's not really good English, but the idea that this is how people have been doing things for multiple generations. I'll give you a great example. A friend of mine, when she graduated from college, you know, she had her first job, she got her first paycheck, and she went to her grandmother and said, hey, what should I do with this check? And she said, go to the check casher to cash your check. And this person was very bankable, if you will. So we have generational issues we have to work through. So anyway, we have the technology. We also have to understand that there's a behavioral change component to it. And if we do that together, we can solve this bigger issue.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come to the question I asked at the beginning. Cryptocurrencies. People talk about them as, you know, the way to, maybe for communities that are not being served by traditional institutions, to take financial matters into their own hands, create their own currency, not rely even on organizations like MoCaFi. So, Tidhar, you're all about what's better than cash. Are cryptocurrencies better than cash?
I'll let Shamina take that question.
No, really, go ahead.
I mean, you know, it's...
she's landed you in it, sorry.
You know, you said sooner, it's called sooner than you think. I think it's just too early to say. And there are many challenges and ways for us to understand how it works. I mean, I just read a couple of days ago that Stanford Business School was looking at distributed ledger technologies, and 75%, it's still in the pilot phase. And so there's a lot that we still need to learn before we can... I know there's many of our members, whether it's World Food Program at the UN and other UN agencies, are testing distributed ledger technologies to see if they can help with issues like transparency. But of course, that would need to be designed for it. But it's too early to say.
Yeah. And I would just say, look, I'll hit it right on the head. I mean, I think it's about motivation, right? So in a cash economy, things that are sort of the things you don't want to talk about are the things that are usually transacted in cash. More than digital, right? So I'm not even going to crypto. But things like guns are not bought with a Mastercard. Drugs are usually not bought with a credit card. So the transactions that happen in cash at scale sometimes are not necessarily the ones that you're going to tell your parents about. With cryptocurrencies, I think it's important to just ask the question, because I'm not talking about blockchain. That's sort of a method at this point. I think the idea of alternative currencies and cryptocurrencies and things like that, I do agree. I think it's too soon to tell, but I would sort of question, or at least ask us to question the motivation behind it. To do what? Is the, you know, like anything, currency, money, bank accounts, this is all about a means to an end. So thinking about what the end is in this instance, I think would be the important question to ask.
Do you have any view on crypto?
I do, actually. I think I think there is real applicability for underserved communities. And the dream that I have and we have as a team that we talk a lot about is, at the end of the day, wouldn't it be interesting if all of us, but this population in particular, had the ability to control their own data? And with their own data, there's value in that data, and how they might be able to monetize the value of that data might be through a coin. And I don't know if it's Bitcoin or whatever it is, but it's more the concept that we know that great companies are making a lot of money based on that data. And folks that live on Park End Avenue, you know, are as valuable as someone who does not. And if you can capture that data and allow someone to get value for that data, and it manifests itself in the form of a cryptocurrency, I think that would be potentially a game changer. And you can imagine a world that those behaviors would allow someone to have access to free banking services, because the value of the data is so great that it more than pays for the cost of the transaction. So so I do think, but it highlights in my mind generically that having a diverse team of people thinking about problems that reflect their own experience is important, because then people can bring their own perspectives to solving some of these problems and using the technology to solve the issues that they're familiar with. So anyway.
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of minutes left. I'll do one more round and ask you each to say, what do you think are some great unsolved problems that are not being tackled yet, but that might be tackled sooner than you think? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first. Well, Shamina mentioned those 2 billion people, and whoever is going to, and I think many people in this room could be part of the solution, and of course, actors sitting here. We still have, you know, almost 2 billion people who are unbanked, and the question of how to design products that will reach those people all over the world, how to make sure that you mentioned the issue of transparency and making sure that people have full information on the products they're using, making sure they have recourse mechanisms. That's very, very important, to design in a way that is responsible, but also responsive to people's needs and to their capabilities. That will be a good way to start tackling that problem.
Okay.
I was going to say that I think the sooner than you think problem that I actually think it's a really huge opportunity is the growing and new middle class in Asia. And so I think as we look around the world, if we're truly going to be a global society, to look at Asia and look what's happening in Indonesia and look what's happening in China and Southeast Asia and India, they are redefining what the middle class looks like and how they purchase and what they purchase. So even as much time as we spend working here, because there are other issues that we need to be thinking about with preserving the middle class in more developed markets, I think the enormous opportunity for growth is coming out of Asia and the new middle class coming out of Asia.
Wole, last word to you.
And I think I would just say that sooner than you think is individuals owning their own data and figuring out how to monetize that might be sooner than you think.
All right. So we developed some good ways for them to do it. All right. Wole, Shamina, and Tidhar, thank you very much.